Hello there, welcome to Nighttime Stories. I hope you've had a wonderful day. Was it amazing or just okay? Drop a rating from 1 to 10 in the comments. Now it's time to unwind. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Before you get cozy, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. It helps bring more bedtime stories your way. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. I don't know how to explain what happened without sounding crazy. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I can't stop replaying it in my head, the sound of footsteps crunching outside my tent, the feeling of being watched, the moment I realized that whoever was out there wasn't lost. They were following me. I went camping alone. I know that was my first mistake. Everyone warns you not to go solo, but I've done it dozens of times. I've hiked through dense forests, slept under the stars, woken up to deer drinking from nearby streams. It's peaceful, no distractions, no noise, just me and the wilderness. This time was no different. At least, not at first. I picked a remote spot deep in the woods, off the marked trails. The kind of place where no one just stumbles across your campsite by accident. It took me half a day of hiking to reach it. By the time I set up my tent, the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long, spindly shadows across the ground. I made a fire, cooked a quick meal, and sat back, listening to the forest settle into its nighttime rhythm. Crickets, a light breeze shifting the leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Everything felt normal. Until it didn't. I heard a twig snap. Not the random crack of a branch falling, this was different. Deliberate, close. I froze, ears straining. Another step. Then another. Slow, measured. Someone was walking toward my camp. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the tree line. Hello? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Silence. Just the wind rustling the branches. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. Probably an animal. That's what I told myself. What else could it be? I pushed the thought away, doused the fire, and climbed into my tent. I lay there listening. For a long time, it was quiet. Then, a single step. Closer this time. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. I wanted to check. I wanted to unzip the tent, shine my light outside, and prove to myself that no one was there. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I lay there, staring at the fabric of my tent, waiting. And eventually, somehow, I drifted off. By morning, it felt stupid. I stepped out of my tent and scanned the area. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had been there. I was being paranoid, that's all. I shook it off, packed my gear, and started hiking deeper into the woods. Away from the trails, away from people, and, unknowingly, closer to them. I hiked for hours. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No bird song, no rustling in the underbrush. Just an eerie, suffocating stillness. I tried to ignore it. Tried to tell myself I was imagining things. Then I saw the first footprint. Not mine. Not fresh. But human. Leading in the same direction I was going. I stopped, staring down at it. My stomach twisted. I was miles off the main trail. No one should be out here. And yet, someone had been. And recently, I thought about turning back. But something made me keep going. I don't know why. Curiosity, stubbornness, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I was alone. I hiked another hour before setting up camp for the night. Same routine. Fire, dinner, listening to the forest. Only this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Like I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and now I was walking towards something I wasn't supposed to find. I told myself it was just my nerves, that I'd feel better in the morning. But then, in the dead of night, I heard it again. The footsteps, closer than before. This time they didn't stop. They circled my tent, slow, deliberate, like someone was testing the boundary, seeing how close they could get. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just lay there, listening to the soft crunch of leaves, the shifting of weight. Then a sound that made my blood go cold. A low whisper, muffled, indistinct, but right outside the tent. Someone was talking. Not to me, to themselves, or worse, to someone else. I grabbed my knife, my flashlight, anything that felt like a weapon. And then, as suddenly as it started, the whispering stopped. The footsteps retreated, fading back into the trees. I stayed awake until dawn. When the first light crept through the tent fabric, I crawled out, exhausted and on edge. And then I saw them. Footprints. All around my tent. They weren't mine. They weren't random. They were deliberate. Like someone had been watching me all night. Like someone had been waiting for me to come out. I packed my gear faster than I ever have in my life. Didn't eat, didn't drink. Just started hiking back the way I came. But something was wrong. The footprints. They didn't just circle my tent. They led back into the trees, in the same direction I was heading. Like whoever had been out there wasn't done with me yet. I didn't waste time packing up. Every sound in the forest felt too sharp, too deliberate, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I grabbed my gear and started moving, keeping my eyes on the ground, following the same winding path that had brought me here. I told myself I was just being cautious, but deep down I knew the truth. I was running. The footprints were leading ahead of me now. I wasn't sure how that was possible. Had someone walked this path before me? Or worse, were they up ahead now, just out of sight? The thought sent a sick feeling through me. I tried to push it away. Focus. Get back to the main trail. Just keep moving. I walked for hours. No stops, no breaks. But no matter how far I went, the forest felt the same. Unchanged. Like I wasn't getting anywhere. Like I was just looping through the same stretch of trees. Then I heard it again. The sound that had kept me awake the night before. Footsteps. Behind me. I froze. The breath in my lungs turned to ice. The sound was subtle, just a slight shift of weight, a soft crunch against the earth. But I knew someone was there. Standing, waiting. I turned, scanning the trees. At first, nothing. Just the dense, unmoving forest. Then, a shadow. Too far to make out clearly, but close enough that I knew I wasn't alone. They weren't walking toward me. They weren't moving at all. Just standing, watching. I gripped my knife tighter. "Who's there?" My voice came out low, unsteady. No response. No movement. The shadow remained, as if it belonged to the trees themselves. I stepped back, muscles coiled, ready to bolt. And then, it stepped forward. I didn't wait. Didn't think. I turned and started running. The trees blurred around me. My pack bounced against my shoulders. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until my own breath became the loudest sound in the forest. When I finally stopped, gasping for air, the silence closed in around me again. I listened, waited. Nothing. Whoever or whatever had been following me, they weren't there anymore. At least I thought they weren't. I kept walking, slower this time, more cautious. I needed to think. How far was I from the trailhead? Was I even going the right way? I reached for my phone. No signal. Of course. I shoved it back into my pocket and kept moving. One step at a time. Listening. Waiting. Then, up ahead, something caught my eye. A break in the trees. Sunlight filtering through an opening. Relief crashed through me. An opening meant I was getting closer to the main trail. I pushed forward, quickening my pace. But as I stepped into the clearing, I stopped cold. My stomach twisted. There, in the center of the clearing, was my campsite. The same one I had packed up hours ago. Exactly the same. Like I had never left. A chill crawled up my spine. That wasn't possible. I had been walking away from this place for hours. Had I gotten turned around? Had I been led back here? My eyes darted around the campsite. The fire pit, my tent, still collapsed. And then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine, and they were fresh, leading straight to my tent. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My skin prickled with the overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. The forest around me felt too quiet, too heavy. And then I saw it, a shape standing at the edge of the clearing. Not moving, not making a sound, just watching. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't my imagination. Someone had been following me. And now, they were done hiding. I stepped backward, hands shaking. The figure tilted their head slightly. And then, they smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not an accident. A deliberate, knowing grin. Like they had been waiting for me to notice them. Like they had been following me this entire time. And now, they were finally close enough. I turned and ran. No hesitation. I tore through the trees, branches whipping against my arms. I wasn't thinking anymore. Just moving. Just escaping. I don't remember how long I ran. Minutes, hours. The only thing I remember is the moment I burst onto the main trail. The instant relief of seeing a well-worn path. The sight of other hikers in the distance. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. I just kept moving. And I didn't slow down until I was back at my car, hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I threw my pack in, slammed the door, and sped away. I didn't breathe until I was miles down the road. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not at first. Because how do you explain something like that? How do you tell someone you were followed through the woods by a person who never spoke, never got close enough to touch you, but was always there? A week passed before I finally opened my backpack. I had tossed it in the trunk and tried to forget about it. But when I pulled it out, something wasn't right. The zipper was partially open. My stomach knotted. I hadn't opened it since I left the woods. Had I? My hands shook as I pulled it open. At first, everything looked normal. But then I saw it. Tucked inside the main compartment, a single Polaroid. Of me, asleep in my tent. I didn't believe the stories about the house at first. I'd heard them all growing up, the usual urban legend nonsense passed down by kids desperate for something exciting in a town that had nothing going on. They said people went missing there decades ago. That the owners never really left, even after they died. That if you stayed inside long enough, you'd start to hear whispers, and they wouldn't be yours. But it was just a house, just a place, left behind and forgotten like a rotting memory. At least, that's what I thought. Before we went inside, it was my idea. I won't pretend otherwise. I was the one who said, "Let's go check it out." The four of Usme, Alex, Nate, and Jeshid spent the summer trying to find something, anything to do, before we all went our separate ways after graduation. The house had come up in conversation more than once. "Dude, no one's lived there in like 50 years, Nate had said when I first mentioned it. Jess had scoffed, rolling her eyes. "And what exactly do you think we'll find? Ghosts?" I shrugged. Maybe not. But aren't you at least a little curious?" Alex, always the quiet one, the cautious one, had frowned. "I don't know, man. That place gives me a bad feeling." It was the way he said it that stuck with me. Not like he was scared of getting caught trespassing. Like he was genuinely uneasy. That should have been the first sign. But I didn't listen. None of us did. The house sat on the edge of town, just past a stretch of dead-end roads and empty farmland. No one ever went near it, not anymore. Not since the Grayson family disappeared. That was the backstory, the part that made it more than just a creepy old building. In 1971, the entire family vanished overnight. Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, their 2 kids gone without a trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just an empty house, fully furnished, like they had meant to come back but never did. People had theories, of course. A murder-suicide, the parents snapping under some unseen pressure. A failed escape from town, running from something only they knew about. Or, if you asked the kids at school, something worse. Something still inside the house. Waiting. We arrived just after sunset. I don't know why we chose to go at night. Maybe we thought it would make it more exciting. Or maybe none of us wanted to admit how unnerved we felt. The house was exactly as I expected. 2 stories, steep-roofed, the kind of Victorian build that might have been beautiful once. But time had done its work. The paint had peeled away, the windows were either shattered or coated in grime, and the front door hung slightly ajar like someone had left in a hurry. Like it was waiting for someone to come inside. Jess was the first to break the silence. "So, are we doing this or not?" Nate grinned, the kind of grin people wear when they're trying to hide nerves. "Ladies first." Jess didn't hesitate. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. And just like that, we followed. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not dust, not mildew, something else. Something rotting. I swallowed the urge to gag as we stepped into what had once been the main hall. The house had been left almost completely untouched. Furniture still sat in place, draped with sheets gone yellow with time. A grand staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, the wooden banister warped with age. Faint outlines of family photos clung to the walls, their frames missing, like someone had tried to erase them. Like they had been taken down, deliberately. I could hear Nate breathing beside me. Shallow, uneasy. Jess, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. She moved ahead of us, running a hand along the dust-covered banister. "What do you think happened here?" she asked. Alex answered from behind me. "They left." His voice was quiet. Too quiet. I turned to look at him. His expression was wrong. Like he wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. Like he was afraid. I was about to ask him what was wrong when... Bang! The noise came from upstairs. A sharp, heavy thud that made my pulse jump to my throat. All of us froze. Jess turned slowly, her confidence slipping. "That was just the house settling, right?" Alex didn't answer. I forced out a laugh. Too forced, too tight. "Yeah, Old houses make noise. But I didn't believe it. And I don't think any of us did. Nate exhaled sharply. Okay, cool. We heard a noise. We checked the house. Let's get out of here. Jess scoffed. Are you serious? He gave her a look. We don't know if we're alone in here. She rolled her eyes. No one's lived here for 50 years. If someone's upstairs, it's probably just a squatter. Alex was still staring up the staircase, not blinking, like he was listening for something. Then, softly, we're not alone. His voice sent a chill through me. Jess laughed, but it was forced. Oh, come on, don't. Footsteps. From the second floor. Slow, deliberate. One. Then another. Then another. Coming toward the stairs. Coming toward us. No one moved. No one spoke. We just stood there, rooted to the spot. And then, the faintest whisper. Not from above. From behind us. You shouldn't have come. I spun around so fast I almost tripped. The doorway was empty. Nothing but the night beyond. The room felt wrong now. Heavier. Like we had stepped into something that didn't want us there. My hands were cold. And for the first time since we arrived, I felt it. A presence. Watching. Waiting. Knowing. Jess spoke first. I think we should go. For once, no one argued. I turned toward the front door, heart pounding. We needed to leave. Now. But before we could take a single step, the door slammed shut. The door slammed shut with a force that sent dust spilling from the ceiling. The sound echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls like a gunshot. Jess spun on her heel, her bravado gone. What the hell? She rushed to the door, yanking on the handle. It didn't budge. I swallowed the knot in my throat and moved toward her. Maybe the wood's warped. Let me try. I wrapped my hands around the doorknob, twisting, pulling. It felt solid, like something had locked it in place from the other side. Nate was pacing behind us, running a hand through his hair. All right, not funny. Which one of you set this up? Alex stood frozen in place, staring at the staircase. His face was pale, mouth slightly open, like he wasn't really hearing us. Jess huffed and banged on the door. If this is a prank, it's not funny. You got your scare, let's go. No answer. The house settled around us, an eerie silence stretching between the walls. I turned uneasy. No one locked it. You saw us walk in. The door was already open. Nate let out a sharp breath. Then why won't it open now? Before I could answer, something moved at the top of the stairs. A slow shift in the shadows. A shape, barely visible in the dim light. Alex's voice came out barely above a whisper. There's someone up there. The rest of us froze. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I followed his gaze. The second floor was dark, but something was there. Not standing, not moving in the way a person would. It was just a sliver of darkness that hadn't been there before. Jess let out a nervous laugh. I bet it's a raccoon or something, but she didn't sound convinced. Nate took a hesitant step back. I don't think raccoons whisper. The thing in the darkness shifted again, and suddenly I felt it, the undeniable stomach-twisting certainty that we were being watched. Alex exhaled slowly. We need to leave. I nodded, stepping away from the door. We'll find another way out. Jess let out a frustrated sigh, but she didn't argue. I moved toward the nearest window, brushing away the dust and grime with my sleeve. Outside, the world looked the same quiet, empty, like the house hadn't stirred in years. I reached for the frame, fingers wrapping around the wood. It was stuck. I pushed harder, but it wouldn't budge. Jess moved to another window, struggling with it as well. You have got to be kidding me. Nate cursed under his breath. How the hell are all the windows stuck shut? Alex finally tore his gaze away from the stairs. His voice was lower than before. It's not the house keeping us in. A heavy silence followed his words. I didn't want to ask, but I did anyway. Then what is? He licked his lips, eyes darting back up the stairs. I don't know, but I think it wants us to go up there. Jess scoffed, throwing her hands in the air. Absolutely not. I don't care if there's a whole vault of treasure up there. I'm not playing into some creepy horror movie setup. But even as she spoke, none of us moved toward the door again. A slow chill ran down my spine as a realization settled in. It wasn't just that the house had trapped us, it was guiding us. Alex took a deep breath, his shoulders tense. We have two choices: stay down here and wait for something to happen, or go up and see what it wants. Jess glared at him. There's a third option. We break a window and get the hell out of here. I wanted to believe it would work, but I already knew the answer. It won't let us. Nate let out a short, humorless laugh. Listen to us. It won't let us. Do you hear how insane that sounds? Alex turned to him, his expression unreadable. Then open the door. Nate hesitated. He didn't try the door again. Instead, we all found ourselves looking up. Something waited on the second floor, and somehow we knew that ignoring it wasn't an option. I squared my shoulders. Fine, we go up, but we stay together. Jess swore under her breath, but followed as I started toward the stairs. Each step groaned under our weight, the wood old and brittle, but the house held firm. The air grew heavier, thick with something I couldn't name. Halfway up, the temperature dropped. Not a gradual change, an immediate, sharp shift that sent a shudder through my limbs. Jess muttered, "This place is cursed." At the top of the stairs, a hallway stretched before us, lined with doorways leading into shadowed rooms. The sense of being watched had grown unbearable. My skin prickled, my every instinct screaming to turn back. Alex stopped at the first door, his fingers hovering over the handle. This one. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't want to know. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a room frozen in time. A child's bedroom. The furniture was coated in dust, but everything was intact: small bed, wooden dresser, a collection of toys scattered across the floor. A music box sat on the nightstand, its lid slightly open. Nate let out a slow breath. This is unsettling. Jess stepped inside, crossing her arms. So what now? We look for ghostly footprints. Alex wasn't listening. He moved toward the nightstand, reaching for the music box. I started to tell him not to, but it was too late. He lifted the lid. A soft melody filled the air, delicate and slow. Then something clicked. The closet door across the room slid open, inch by inch. I took a step back. The inside of the closet was pitch black, no light, no reflection, a void of absolute darkness. And in that darkness, a shape shifted. A pair of small, pale hands emerged from the shadows. Fingers curled against the wood, gripping the frame. Then the hands pulled, and something started crawling out. Jess screamed. I grabbed Alex, shoving him toward the door. Run! We didn't look back. Didn't stop. The thing in the closet was moving, dragging itself across the floor with slow, deliberate movements. We bolted down the stairs, our footsteps frantic. The second we reached the front door, it swung open on its own. No hesitation, no second thoughts. We ran. By the time we reached the road, lungs burning, legs aching, the house stood silent behind us. The door had closed again, like it had never been open at all. Jess gasped for breath. We're never speaking about this again. Alex didn't say anything. He was still holding the music box. I hadn't seen him take it, but now that he had, I knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. No one spoke on the way back to town. Alex sat in the passenger seat, his fingers curled tightly around the music box like he wasn't even aware he was holding it. Jess sat in the back beside Nate, arms crossed, legs bouncing. Every so often she'd shoot Alex a look, then glance away like she wanted to say something but thought better of it. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The road stretched out ahead, empty, silent except for the hum of the engine. The further we got from the house, the heavier the tension in the car became. It should have been the opposite. We should have been relieved. But none of us were. Because we had left the house. But something had left with us. The music box, and whatever had crawled out of that closet, it wasn't finished with us yet. Jess was the first to break. "Throw it out." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Alex didn't react at first. He just kept staring straight ahead, his grip tightening. Jess shoved forward, reaching over Nate to grab at it. "Seriously, Alex, throw it out of the window. We are not keeping that thing." Alex jerked away from her, his voice low. "I'm not getting rid of it." Jess blinked. "Excuse me?" He finally turned to look at her, and for the first time, I noticed how pale he was. His skin had taken on a waxy, almost translucent quality, and his eyes were darker than usual. Not tired, not exhausted, shadowed. Nate leaned back in his seat. "Dude, she's right. You didn't mean to take it, right? Just toss it." Alex ran a thumb over the wooden lid, his expression unreadable. "I don't think I can." I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the wheel tighter. "Why not?" He hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, "It won't let me." A cold, sinking feeling settled in my gut. Jess groaned, throwing herself back into the seat. "Okay, nope. Number, we are not doing this haunted object thing. We are not bringing some cursed antique into town." She was right. We all knew she was right. But the way Alex sat there, unmoving, made my skin crawl. I wasn't sure if he was refusing to let go of the music box, or if it was refusing to let go of him. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the air in the car felt suffocating. Jess was the first one out. She slammed the door, pacing across the yard, arms wrapped around herself. Nate got out next, rubbing a hand down his face. "I need a drink, a strong one." Alex was the last to move. He stepped out slowly, the music box still clutched in his hands. He stared down at it, jaw clenched like he was fighting against something none of us could see. I stood by the car, my pulse drumming in my ears. "Come inside. We'll figure this out." Jess shook her head. "Nope. Number, I'm out. I want nothing to do with this." Nate hesitated, looking between Alex and me. "I don't know, man. This whole thing feels wrong." I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "I know, but we can't just leave him." Alex finally spoke. "It's fine. I just need to sit down." He sounded strange, like someone had hollowed out his voice. Jess rolled her eyes but followed us inside. "Fine, but if something weird happens, I'm calling an exorcist or something." Nate snorted. "You know one?" "Number, but I'll find one." Inside, I sat up in the living room while Alex sat on the couch, the music box balanced on his knees. He hadn't opened it again since the house. Jess stayed by the window, arms still crossed. "What's the plan exactly?" Nate flopped into a chair. "We burn it." Alex flinched. It was small, barely noticeable, but I saw it. I cleared my throat. "Maybe we should figure out what it is first." Jess scoffed. "It's a creepy little music box from a creepy little house where people disappeared. There's nothing to figure out." Alex finally looked up. His expression was strange, half lost, half focused. "I don't think it's just a music box." None of us spoke. Then, without another word, he reached forward and opened it. The melody spilled into the room, slow and mechanical, like something winding down. And then the lights flickered. Nate sat up straighter. "Nope, nope, shut it right now." Jess backed away from the window. "I told you not to open it." But Alex wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the inside of the box, his breathing slow, measured. I leaned forward. "Alex." He blinked, shaking his head like he was trying to clear it. I think it's a way in. A chill ran down my spine. A way into what? Alex lifted his gaze to mine. His pupils were too wide, swallowing almost all the color in his eyes. A way in for them. The lights flickered again. The temperature in the room dropped. And then, a creaking sound. Not from the house. Not from the music box. From the closet in the hallway. Nate muttered, "I thought I shut that." Jess took a step back. "You did." The door inched open. A sliver of blackness peeked through the crack. And then, the hand. Pale, skeletal fingers curled around the edge of the door frame. Something shifted in the shadows, pressing against the doorway, stretching, moving. Jess screamed. The lights cut out completely. I scrambled backward, my pulse a thunderous roar in my ears. Alex sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the hallway. The music box kept playing, the melody warping, twisting, slowing. The closet door swung fully open. Something stepped out. I couldn't see its face, but I knew. It had followed us from the house. And now, it wasn't leaving. The thing in the hallway didn't move at first. It just stood there, pressed against the frame of the open closet, half hidden in the shadows. The only thing I could see clearly were the fingers long, pale, curled around the edge of the door. Then, slowly, they pulled away, and the door started to close. Not all at once. Not like something retreating. More like something was watching us, testing how much it could show itself before we ran. My pulse hammered in my ears. I didn't want to look at the others. I was afraid of what I might see on their faces. The music box was still playing. Alex sat frozen, eyes locked on the hallway. His fingers twitched, like he was fighting the urge to open the box further. "Close it," I whispered. He didn't move. Jess grabbed his wrist, yanking the music box from his lap. "I swear to God, Alex." The melody cut off. Everything stopped. The room went so silent my ears rang from the absence of sound. The air felt heavier, like we were being watched from every angle. Then Nate took a step toward the hallway. "Wait," I said quickly. He hesitated. His voice was low. "The door." I forced myself to look. The closet door had shut completely. The hallway was empty. Whatever had been there, it was gone. At least for now. We didn't waste time. Jess shoved the music box into a pillowcase, wrapping it up like it was something toxic. "We need to get rid of it." I nodded, moving to grab my keys. "We'll burn it." Alex flinched. Jess noticed. "You're not going to argue about that, are you?" Alex looked down at his hands. I don't think burning it will do anything." Nate ran a hand over his face. "Okay, then what? We keep it? Bring it to some psychic? Drop it in the ocean?" Alex hesitated before answering. "We bring it back." Silence. I stared at him. Back where? He finally looked at me. His face was paler than before, his eyes unfocused like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. "The house," he said. And somehow, I knew he was right. We drove in silence. It was just past midnight when we pulled back up to the old house. The windows were dark, the structure looming against the trees like it had been waiting for us to return. None of us wanted to go inside. Jess was the first to say it. "What if the door locks again?" Nate exhaled sharply. "Then we run. We're not staying this time." Alex didn't say anything. He was holding the wrapped-up music box like a weight in his lap, his fingers gripping the cloth too tightly. We stepped out of the car. The air was thick with humidity. The smell of damp wood and decay pressed against my nose as we moved toward the front door. Alex walked ahead of us. He didn't hesitate when he reached the entrance, just pushed it open and stepped inside. I exchanged a glance with Jess and Nate before following. The house felt different now. Not colder. Not louder. Just wrong. Like something had been disturbed. Like the walls knew we had taken something from them. We moved to the staircase. Back up to the second floor. Back to the room with the closet. My chest tightened as we stepped inside. Everything was as we had left it. The bed, the dresser, the dust-covered floor. But the closet door was open again. Wider than before. Alex stepped forward. Without a word, he placed the music box inside. And then, slowly, he shut the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air shifted. The heaviness lifted, like a weight being removed from our chests. The smell of rot lessened. The silence, once deafening, settled into something more natural. The house didn't feel alive anymore. It felt empty. Jess let out a long, shaky breath. Is that it? Alex's shoulders sagged. I think so. Nate turned, already moving toward the exit. Good, then let's get out of here. This time, the door didn't close behind us. It stayed open, yawning into the night. But I didn't look back. None of us did. We just walked out, without running, without speaking. And when we reached the car, the house stood silent and still, waiting for time to finish swallowing it whole. We never talked about it again. Not the house. Not the music box. Not the thing in the closet. We went our separate ways after that summer. Jess moved out of town. Nate enlisted. Alex changed. I tried to stay in touch, but he grew distant. I saw him once, years later. We didn't talk much. But I'll never forget what he said before we parted ways. It's still there, you know. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I just nodded and walked away. And I never looked back. I love my job. I've been here for 5 years, and I truly believe the work I do makes a difference in the community. Feeling like my time matters keeps me motivated. My organization isn't huge, but we have multiple locations. Until recently, I worked on the 6th floor of a downtown building we leased. From my office window, I could see the state government building across the street, rows of people at their desks, living their lives, just like me. The company had been dealing with budget cuts, though, and most of my coworkers were being transferred to our main office outside of town. The building itself had changed hands a few months ago, and as leases expired, entire floors emptied out. The layout of my floor was a large U-shape, with offices along the outer edges and a conference room and break room in the center. The elevators and bathrooms sat at the bend of the U. Most of the remaining staff worked on the opposite side, at least. They had before they were relocated. Now most days I was completely alone. At first, I enjoyed the silence. I could blast my music, work without distractions, and actually be productive. Then things started happening. And now, I don't want to go back. 3 days ago, I heard whistling. A soft, clear tune coming from the far end of the hallway. I thought someone must have come in without signing the digital check-in tablet, but when I stepped outside my office, the hallway was empty. The lights flickered. The air shifted, like when you walk into a room where people were just talking about you. That thick, charged silence, waiting for you to react. I grabbed my bag and left early. That night, I texted a coworker who had already been transferred to the main office. He responded immediately, confused. He said he hadn't been relocated yet. I asked what he meant, but he never replied. The next morning, I called another colleague from my floor. His phone rang down the hall. It rang until someone or something picked up. I heard the call connect, but there was no voice, no sound. Nothing. My stomach twisted. Had I misunderstood? Maybe my coworkers weren't at the new office. Maybe they were just working from home. But that feeling didn't go away. It felt like I was missing something. Later that afternoon, the whistling returned. This time, it was closer. I sat at my desk, frozen, listening as it moved not randomly, but deliberately, like someone was pacing. Then my office door creaked open. I hadn't touched it. The air inside my office felt different, charged like the moment before a thunderstorm. That's when I saw him. The man in the government building across the street. He stood at his window, hands pressed against the glass. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear. At first, I thought he was staring at me. Then he lifted a hand and pointed. Not at my office. Behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. When I turned back, the man was gone. I grabbed my things and left without looking back. This morning, I told myself I had imagined everything. That nothing strange had happened, that it was just stress. But when I arrived, the parking lot was empty. Fresh snow coated the ground, untouched by footprints or tire tracks. I tried calling building security. The line was disconnected. I took the stairs to the main lobby. Empty. No receptionist, no guards. No one. When I returned to my floor, my office door was wide open. Papers were scattered across my desk. The computer screen flickered, then shut off. And then, the whistling came again. But this time, it wasn't slow or lazy. It was moving, fast, running, toward me. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway lights buzzed and popped, plunging the floor into half-darkness. I grabbed my bag and ran for the elevator. The whistling grew louder. I couldn't see where it was coming from, but I felt it. Something was inches behind me. The elevator doors slid open. I threw myself inside, jamming the ground floor button. The whistling stopped right outside the doors. And then, a shadow moved. For a split second, it was there. A hand. Reaching. Trying to stop the doors from closing. They slammed shut just before it could. I didn't breathe again until I was outside. I drove straight to the main office, barely able to keep my hands steady on the wheel. The sight of actual, real people going about their day nearly broke me. I ran inside straight to HR. They blinked at me when I asked about my team. There was no record of them transferring. No one knew where they were. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I texted with someone a few days ago." They checked again. "There's nothing here. No transfers. No relocation orders." As far as the company knew, my team was still working on the 6th floor. Except they weren't. They hadn't been there for days. And no one seemed to care. My boss barely glanced up from his meeting when I showed up. HR was more concerned with budget cuts than missing employees. But they still weren't ready for me at the main building. They told me to go back tomorrow. Like everything was fine. Like I hadn't just escaped from something I can't explain. I don't want to go back. I don't know who or what has been whistling in that building. I just know one thing. Tomorrow, I might not make it out again. The bus pulled away, leaving me stranded in front of a rundown convenience store, regretting every decision that led me here. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, stretching long, jagged shadows across the cracked pavement. The gas station wasn't much faded signage, rusted fuel pumps, and a flickering neon open sign barely clinging to life. I had landed this job out of necessity, not choice. My shift started at 5 p.m. and lasted until 1 a.m. Not ideal, but rent wasn't going to pay itself. My boyfriend had promised to pick me up most nights, but the idea of waiting alone in the dead of night still made me uneasy. I pushed open the glass door, triggering a tinny bell chime overhead. The inside smelled of stale air, expired snacks, and cheap cleaner. The shelves were cluttered with dusty candy bars, off-brand sodas, and overpriced motor oil. Behind the counter stood the angriest-looking man I had ever seen. He hunched over the register, scowling at the screen like he was one wrong beep away from smashing it to pieces. A crooked name tag on his shirt read, "Carl, Manager." I approached cautiously. "Hey, You're Aaron?" He barely glanced up. "Yeah." Carl grunted, jerking his thumb toward the back. "Lockers are behind the stockroom. Use Mason's." I hesitated. "I'm sharing?" "Nah, he's gone. Let's just say he was slow in the head, kept screwing up orders, mumbling nonsense all the time. We thought he was going to be a cheap hire, but he cost us more than he was worth. Useless." I clenched my jaw but nodded. "All right." Before I could walk away, the bell jingled again. A man in a faded trucker cap and flannel jacket stepped inside, balancing two small packages. He turned toward me, offering a friendly smile. "You must be the new hire," he said in a light southern drawl. I returned the smile, relieved to see at least one decent person here. "Yeah, I just started." "Good to meet you." He set the packages down on the counter and extended a hand. "I'm Tim. Do deliveries here a few times a day, but most of the time it's just you and Carl." He glanced at the manager, then back at me, lowering his voice. "Bless your heart," he muttered with pity, then left. Carl ignored him completely. I forced a tight-lipped smile and headed to the back. The locker room was cramped and stale, barely more than a glorified storage closet. Two lockers sat against the wall labeled Tim and the other Mason. I pulled open Mason's locker, ready to toss my coat inside. And that's when I saw it. A small, battered notebook wedged into the back corner. Its cover was worn, edges curled, pages yellowed from use. I flipped through it absent-mindedly. Most of the pages were filled with doodle-stick figures, swirling patterns, tiny animals. But the very first page was different. A grid, boxes and lines drawn with heavy strokes. It almost looked like a map. I squinted, recognizing the layout. It was the store. Each aisle was marked out in neat rows, the break room, the stock room, the locker room, all there. But there was something extra. An additional room, shaded in, attached to the locker room. I frowned. That wasn't right. The gas station had 3 back rooms. There wasn't a fourth. I glanced up, staring at the wall across from me. A filing cabinet stood against it, covered in old paperwork and stacked cardboard boxes. Curious, I nudged it forward. Just a solid wall. Then I heard footsteps. Approaching the locker room. I quickly shoved the cabinet back into place and turned as Carl stepped into the doorway. He leaned against the frame, eyes scanning the room before settling on me. "Your boyfriend's here," he muttered. I forced a nod. "Right, thanks." Carl didn't move as I walked past him. I could feel his gaze following me the entire way out. For the next week, something about that filing cabinet nagged at me. I never moved it again, but every time I walked into the locker room, my eyes drifted toward it. I told myself it was nothing, until I noticed something about Tim. Most days he brought deliveries straight to the stockroom. That made sense. But every few nights, he'd take large boxes into the locker room. He always came out empty-handed, and whenever I checked after he left, the packages were nowhere to be found. One evening, I saw him carrying another mystery box toward the back. "Hey, Tim," I called casually. He stopped mid-step, forcing a smile. "Evenin'. What's in the boxes?" His expression didn't falter, but I caught the slight shift in his stance. "Just extra inventory." He turned, taking the package toward the stockroom instead. But when I left that night, I saw him again. This time he was walking toward the locker room with the same box. That night, I moved the cabinet again. The wall wasn't just a wall. A faint square outline was carved into the floor. At one end of the square, a keyhole. My heart pounded as I pressed my foot against it. The square shifted. It wasn't just a marking. It was a trapdoor. Footsteps echoed from the store. I shoved the cabinet back into place. Carl stood near the register watching me. "Slow night?" His voice was flat. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah." His eyes lingered on me for too long. I turned back to the counter, forcing myself to act normal. A few days later, my boyfriend pulled up to take me home. As I climbed into the car, I saw Tim unloading a large package from his van. For some reason, I couldn't look away. Then I saw inside the van stacks of sealed boxes, a clipboard sitting on top. I stepped closer. Liver X10, heart X6, kidneys 212. The realization hit me like a freight train. Tim looked up. Our eyes met. His face twisted from surprise to pure, unfiltered rage. He dropped the package and sprinted toward me. I ran faster, jumped into the car. "Drive, now." The police found the hidden basement beneath the locker room. Carl and Tim were arrested. The gas station was a front for organ trafficking. But the worst part? Mason, the disabled man who once worked here, he was arrested too. Not because he was innocent, because he had been caught stealing from their supply and eating them. I wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. Sure, I'd heard the rumors. The whispers about the Northwood dorms being haunted, about the missing student from 10 years ago, about the strange knocking sounds people claimed to hear late at night. But I figured every college had its share of urban legends. I had only been on campus for a month, settling into the routine of early classes, late-night study sessions, and cheap cafeteria food. My roommate Daniel was the opposite of me. Loud, outgoing, constantly surrounded by people. We got along well enough, though I often found myself retreating to the dorm when he went out partying. Northwood had an older, almost forgotten feel to it. The hallways were too quiet at night, the lights dimmer than they should have been, casting long, flickering shadows on the peeling walls. My dorm was on the 4th floor, one of the older wings that had barely been renovated. The room was small. The window overlooked the woods behind campus, and the radiator made strange ticking noises when the air got cold. It started with the door handle. One night, around 2 a.m., I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. The slow, deliberate turn of the knob. Not a rattle, not an accidental bump. Someone was trying to open the door. I sat up, my heart knocking against my ribs. "Daniel?" I called, but I knew he wasn't back yet. He had texted me an hour ago saying he was crashing at a friend's place. The knob stilled, but I could hear breathing on the other side. Soft, measured, waiting. I reached for my phone, but as soon as my fingers brushed the screen, the sound stopped. I waited, frozen, listening. Nothing. After what felt like hours, I convinced myself it was just someone drunk trying to find their room. It was a college dorm, after all. Stupid things happened. But then I noticed something. The peephole was covered. A shiver ran down my spine. I hadn't noticed before, but now that I looked, the tiny circle was completely blacked out, like something, or someone, was standing directly in front of it, watching. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Daniel came back, oblivious, hungover, laughing about something stupid his friends had done. I wanted to tell him, but somehow, saying it out loud made it too real. I convinced myself I was overreacting. Then, a few nights later, it happened again. This time I was awake, sitting at my desk, headphones in, drowning in an essay that was due the next morning. The air was heavy with the scent of burnt coffee and stale dorm room air when I heard it. Knob turning. I ripped my headphones off, my breath caught in my throat. I turned, staring at the door. It turned again, slow, testing. And then, from beneath the door, a shadow, Not just a shadow cast by the dim hallway lights. This one moved. It stretched, creeping inward as if something was pushing itself underneath the door, seeping like smoke into the room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then a knock. 3 soft, deliberate taps. Not from the outside. From inside my closet. I sat there, frozen, my mind scrambling for an explanation. I told myself it was my imagination, that my exhaustion was playing tricks on me, that I had misheard where the sound had come from, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. The knock had been inside the closet. Slow, intentional. My skin prickled with cold sweat as I forced myself to turn my head toward the door. The shadow beneath it was gone. The doorknob was still. The hallway outside was silent. But my closet door, slightly ajar, just enough for darkness to seep out, felt like it was breathing. I stared at it, my pulse hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My body screamed at me to run, but some part of me, the logical part, refused to move. This was a dorm. A normal dorm in a normal college. There was no way someone had been inside my room. No way I hadn't noticed. And yet the air felt thick with something unseen. Something watching. I stood up, slow and deliberate, my chair making the faintest scrape against the floor. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. Movement, breathing, the shift of weight in the dark. Nothing. Just the distant hum of the vending machine down the hall. My fingers clenched into fists. I wasn't going to let paranoia win. This was my room, my space. I wasn't about to start jumping at shadows. I forced myself forward, one step at a time, until I was standing right in front of the closet. My own reflection stared back at me from the cheap mirror attached to the door, wide-eyed, pale. I lifted a hand, hesitated, then grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Nothing. Just the same cramped space filled with my jackets, a stack of shoeboxes, and the laundry I'd been too lazy to put away. My breath left me in a shaky exhale. Of course, there was nothing. There was never anything. I was exhausted, overworked, and psyching myself out over some stupid prank. I shut the closet, locked my dorm room for good measure, and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. I went through my routine, barely thinking, my mind fogged over with the kind of fatigue that clings to you like a weight. I grabbed my bag and went to class, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The campus was buzzing with its usual energy, people rushing to lectures, half-asleep students clutching coffee cups like lifelines, the distant sound of someone blasting music from their dorm window. It felt normal. But then I saw the bulletin board near the student center, a cluster of flyers pinned to the cork. My stomach twisted as my eyes landed on one in particular. Missing person. The photo was of a student, a guy around my age. Short brown hair, glasses, a familiar grin frozen in time. My brain struggled to place where I had seen him before, and then it clicked. His dorm was down the hall from mine. I didn't know him well, had only seen him in passing, but a cold chill ran through me as I read the details. Missing for 5 days. Last seen leaving the dorm late at night. No sign of forced entry in his room. No leads. A creeping unease settled into my stomach. 5 days ago, that was around the time I had started hearing the sounds at my door. When I had first noticed the peephole was covered, I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Colleges had thousands of students. People disappeared all the time. Ran away, dropped out, left without telling anyone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't random, that it was connected. That night I double-locked my door. I shoved my desk chair under the handle, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. It made me feel stupid, but I didn't care. Sleep came in restless waves, every creak of the old building sending a spike of anxiety through me. At some point, deep into the night, I woke up to breathing. Not mine, not Daniel's, right outside my door. Slow, shallow, like someone standing just inches away, listening. I stayed completely still, my heart racing so violently I thought it might shake the bed frame. My phone was under my pillow and I barely dared to move as I reached for it, my fingers shaking as I turned on the screen. 12 a.m. A single notification glowed at the top. Motion detected at your door. I stared at it, my mouth dry. The security app linked to the dorm's hallway cameras had picked something up. My hands fumbled as I tapped it open, my breath caught in my throat. The screen flickered, the grainy camera footage loading. My dorm door was in frame, the dim hallway stretching out in both directions. For a moment, it showed nothing. Then, movement. Someone was standing right in front of my door. Not knocking, not trying the handle, just standing there. And then, they bent down. I watched paralyzed as the figure slowly lowered themselves until they were eye level with the keyhole. Watching. My stomach turned to ice. They knew I was awake, and they were waiting for me to move. A cold sensation spread through my chest, like my body knew something was deeply wrong before my mind could fully process it. I gripped my phone tighter, barely breathing as I watched the screen. The figure outside my door remained crouched, completely still, just inches away from the peephole. I couldn't make out their face, only a vague silhouette in the dim hallway light. They weren't knocking, they weren't moving, just waiting. A part of me wanted to call out, to ask who it was, to break the silence. But another, much stronger instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. Whoever they were, they didn't want to be seen. They wanted to watch. The realization sent a deep electric dread through my limbs. I stayed frozen, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial on my phone. If I called someone, would they hear? Would they try to get in? And then they reached up. Slowly, deliberately, their hand lifted toward the peephole. I watched through the grainy footage, my pulse hammering against my ribs, as their fingers pressed against the tiny glass circle. Covering it, the screen went black. I sucked in a sharp breath. They knew. They knew I was watching. For a long moment, nothing happened. The hallway camera remained dark, my dorm eerily silent except for the soft hum of the old radiator. I didn't move. My skin felt too tight, my body stiff with anticipation, waiting for the next sound, the next shift in the air. But it never came. After what felt like hours, I tapped the app again, refreshing the feed. When the camera flickered back to life, the hallway was empty, no sign of anyone. The peephole was clear. But something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been outside wasn't gone, that they were still nearby, listening. The air in my dorm suddenly felt heavier, the walls closing in, the silence too sharp. I had to check. I had to know. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and moved toward the door as quietly as I could, my bare feet making no sound against the cold floor. My hands were damp with sweat as I reached for the knob, pressing my ear against the wood, straining to hear anything beyond it. I inhaled deeply, bracing myself. Then, I yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. Just the dull hum of the exit sign at the far end, the distant murmur of someone's TV behind a closed door. Nothing unusual. Except for one thing. A small, folded piece of paper lay on the ground right outside my room. I stared at it, my skin crawling with unease. It hadn't been there before. Slowly, I crouched and picked it up, unfolding it with trembling fingers. There was only one sentence scrawled across the page in uneven handwriting. I like watching you sleep. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My fingers gripped the paper so tightly it crumpled in my palm. Someone had been inside the dorm building, standing at my door, watching me. Maybe for days. I slammed the door shut, locked it, then shoved my desk chair under the handle again. My breaths were coming too fast, my mind racing through every possibility. Every time I had dismissed the strange noises, the shifts in the air, the creeping sense of being watched. This wasn't in my head, it wasn't some prank. Someone was fixated on me, and they were getting closer. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind against the window made my skin prickle with paranoia. I kept the dorm lights on, my back pressed against the wall, watching the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. But nothing happened. No more knocks, no more notes. Just an unbearable silence stretching through the early hours of the morning. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to move. My limbs ached from tension, my thoughts clouded with exhaustion, but I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to do something. By the time I made it to campus security, my hands were still shaking. I showed them the note, explained the knocking, the covered peephole, the motion alert from my phone. The officer behind the desk listened with a concerned expression, nodding as I spoke. But when I finished, his response made my stomach twist. "We'll look into it," he said. "But there's not much we can do unless an actual crime was committed." I felt my breath catch. "What do you mean?" "Someone was outside my room in the middle of the night. They left this." I held up the crumpled paper, but he only sighed. Look, dorms have hundreds of students. Pranks happen all the time. And unless we have footage of someone breaking in, it's not really a police matter." I stared at him, my pulse drumming in my ears. "So that's it? You're just going to ignore this?" "We'll increase patrols in your building," he offered. "If anything else happens, let us know." I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed the note and walked out. For the rest of the day, I tried to go about things normally, but everything felt off. I couldn't focus in class. I kept scanning the lecture hall, searching for any familiar face from the footage. Was it someone I knew? Had they been watching me all along? When I returned to my dorm that evening, my hands were slick with sweat as I unlocked the door. I braced myself for something, another note, a new sign that they'd been back. But the room was exactly as I had left it. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. I sat on the bed, my mind churning. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me. If anything, it was worse, stronger. And then my phone buzzed. A new motion alert. I swallowed hard, my fingers hesitating before tapping the notification. The camera feed loaded, flickering slightly, and when it cleared, I stopped breathing. The hallway was empty, but the door to my dorm was slightly open. My entire body locked up. I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it. A single realization took hold, icy and paralyzing. They weren't outside anymore. They were already inside. I didn't move, didn't blink. My breath barely passed my lips as my gaze flicked toward the closet door. Just like before, it was slightly ajar. The air in the room felt suffocating, pressing down on me from all angles. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, my hands barely able to keep steady. 901, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak, but before a sound could leave my throat, the closet door creaked open. The line went dead. The next thing I remember is running. Sprinting down the hall, pushing past anyone in my way, my only thought getting out. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air under the cold glow of the streetlights. The police arrived within minutes. They searched my dorm, questioned my neighbors, even checked security footage. But in the end, they found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no figure on the cameras, no fingerprints but my own. They suggested I might have imagined it, that I had left my door unlocked and the wind had pushed it open, but I knew better. I didn't go back. That same night, I packed my things and stayed with a friend off campus. The next morning, I put in a request for a room transfer. A week later, I moved to another dorm in a different building. For a while, nothing happened. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I was safe now. But sometimes, late at night, I would wake up with the same suffocating feeling. The sensation that someone was there, just beyond my line of sight, standing in the shadows, waiting. And a few weeks later, when I was scrolling through my phone, trying to clear out my old notifications, I saw it. An unread message. No name, no number. Just a single text sent the night I fled my dorm. You were right to run. It's been 5 years since my best friend Ethan disappeared. I remember everything about that day. The weather was perfect, the kind of autumn day where the air is cool but not cold, the trees just starting to shift into shades of orange and gold. We were 18, sitting in the parking lot of the gas station by our old high school, drinking cheap sodas and talking about nothing. Then he left. That was it. No dramatic exit. No weird behavior, no sign that anything was wrong. He got into his car, said, "I'll see you later, man," and drove off. And that was the last time anyone ever saw him. For weeks I waited for him to call, thinking maybe he just needed space. That didn't last long. The police got involved after his mom reported him missing, and soon after, the search started. His car was found abandoned an hour outside of town, parked neatly in a dirt lot next to a trailhead. His wallet was inside, so was his phone. But no Ethan. No footprints leading away from the car, no signs of a struggle. Just an empty vehicle, doors locked, keys in the cup holder. The investigation lasted months, but no real leads ever surfaced. No credit card transactions, no security footage, no body. At some point, people just moved on. Except me. Because you don't just forget someone like Ethan. I won't lie, over the years, I tried to force myself to stop thinking about him. I had to. Living with that constant uncertainty was eating away at me, and no one wants to be the guy still talking about his missing friend when everyone else has moved on. But last week, I saw something that changed everything. I was on my lunch break, scrolling through random Reddit threads, when I landed on a post about weird photo coincidences. Someone had posted a tourist photo from Rome, just a normal street scene, cafes, people walking, a couple posing in front of a fountain. And then I saw him, Ethan, standing in the background. Not walking, not interacting, just standing. His face was partially turned away, but I knew it was him. The same haircut, the same build, the same slouched posture. For a few seconds, my brain tried to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him. Maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see. Then I zoomed in. The shirt. A faded black band tee, his favorite one. The same one he was wearing the day he disappeared. I sat there for a long time, just staring at my screen. The comments were filled with people making jokes, pointing out weird stuff in other pictures, but I couldn't focus on any of it. I clicked on the OP's profile, found their other posts, tried to figure out when this photo was taken. 2 months ago. Ethan disappeared 5 years ago. And yet there he was, looking exactly the same. I told myself it was just a freak coincidence. That's what I wanted to believe. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. I started going through old vacation photos, random news footage, background images on social media. And I kept finding him. In a Paris street photo from 2021. At the edge of a music festival in 2019. In the crowd of a New York City parade last year. Always the same posture. Always watching. But never looking at the camera. Never interacting with anyone. Like he was just passing through. Like he wasn't really there. I thought about telling someone, but what the hell would I even say? Hey, I think my missing best friend is showing up in the background of random photos, and he hasn't aged at all. That's not normal. It's not possible. And yet I couldn't let it go. I spent the entire weekend combing through Google, Facebook, anything that had candid background images. Then, 2 nights ago, I found something that made my skin crawl. A local news segment from last week. Nothing big, just a short piece about a community event in a nearby city. I almost didn't click on it, but as the camera panned across the crowd, there he was. Not in the background this time. Closer. Standing just behind the reporter, slightly out of focus. And this time, he was looking directly at the camera. For the first time since he disappeared. Like he wanted me to see him. I haven't slept since. Every time I close my eyes, I see that frame from the news broadcast. His face. Expressionless. Unmoving. Like he knew I was watching. Like he was waiting. I don't know what to do. But I have this awful feeling that I'll see him again soon. Maybe even closer. I spent the entire night watching that news clip over and over. Ethan stood there, right behind the reporter, just slightly out of focus. But unlike the other pictures where he was always facing away, always blurred by motion this time, he was looking straight at the camera. Right at me. Like he knew I would find him. By morning, I had convinced myself that I was losing it. That maybe this was some kind of grief-fueled delusion. That maybe my brain, desperate for closure, was finding Ethan in places where he didn't actually exist. It made sense, right? Except, the photos were real. The news footage was real. And Ethan had been wearing the exact same clothes he disappeared in. If this was a coincidence, it was a damn perfect one. I needed proof. I needed to find out if anyone else had noticed him. I went back to the Reddit post where I had first seen him, the tourist photo from Romiand, scrolled through the comments. Most of them were jokes or people pointing out weird background details. But one comment stood out. It was buried near the bottom, posted just a few hours before. A user with a throwaway account had replied to the thread. "I've seen him too." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just 4 words. I clicked on the username, hoping for more info. But when I did, a message popped up. "This account has been deleted." I sat back, my heart pounding. Someone else had seen him, and now they were gone. I spent the rest of the day digging. I scoured forums, reverse-searched images, even went through obscure missing person databases to see if there were any similar cases. Nothing. Ethan was the only one. Then, just when I was about to give up, I found something. An old message board post from 2018. The title stopped me cold. "Do you recognize this man? He keeps showing up in my pictures." I clicked on it. The post was from a woman who had been backpacking across Europe. She claimed she had noticed a strange pattern in her vacation photos, the same man, appearing in the background, over and over. Never facing the camera. Never interacting. Just standing there. She had even uploaded a few photos. And in the last one, from London in 2017, I saw him. Ethan. Wearing the same black t-shirt, looking exactly the same, as if he hadn't aged a single day. I scrolled down, searching for more information, but the user had never replied to any of the comments. Most people thought it was a prank or an urban legend. But one reply caught my eye. "If you keep seeing him, stop looking." That night, I started seeing things. At first, it was just my mind playing tricks on me. A shadow in the corner of my room that wasn't there before. A figure standing too far away to make out, disappearing when I turned my head. But then, it got worse. I woke up to a notification on my phone. An airdrop request. A photo. No name, no sender. Just an image of my own apartment. Taken from the street below. Taken minutes ago. I rushed to the window, heart hammering, but the street was empty. No sign of whoever took the picture. No sign of him. But I knew Ethan was watching. The next morning, I tried to call his mom. We hadn't talked much since the first year after he disappeared. She had moved out of town, tried to start fresh. I wasn't even sure if she'd answer. But she did. "Hello?" Her voice was tired, wary. I swallowed hard. "It's me. I think I found something about Ethan." Silence. Then, in a quiet, brittle voice, "You shouldn't be looking." A chill ran through me. "What?" A pause, then softer this time. "He's gone, honey. You need to let him go." No, listen. I pressed. I've seen him. In photos. Videos. Just last week he was on the news. She let out a sharp breath. Stop. I blinked. I mean it, she said. Don't talk about him. Don't look for him. She sounded panicked. Like she was afraid. Mrs. Carter, what's going on? I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she hung up. I sat there, my phone still pressed to my ear, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I had expected her to be shocked, confused, hopeful, not terrified. Why was she scared? And why did she tell me to stop looking? That night I locked all my doors. I wasn't taking any chances. I tried to distract myself, tried to pretend everything was fine. But then, right before midnight, I got a text. No number, no name. Just a single message. He's closer now. My skin went ice cold. I stared at the screen, hands shaking. Then, another notification. An image. I hesitated before clicking on it. And when I did, I nearly dropped my phone. It was a picture of me, sitting on my couch, taken from outside my window. A blurry figure stood in the background, watching me, waiting. Ethan. I ran to the window, throwing the blinds open. Nothing. I grabbed my keys, ran to the front door, yanked it open. The street was empty. But on my doorstep, placed neatly at the center of the doormat, was a photograph. An old one. From our last summer together. Ethan and I sitting on the hood of his car, smiling at the camera. But someone had scratched my face out. And underneath, scrawled in shaky black ink, were 3 words. You found me. I stared at the photograph on my doorstep, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Ethan and I sitting on the hood of his car. My face was scratched out. And beneath it, written in jagged, uneven handwriting, you found me. I didn't touch it. Didn't pick it up, didn't move. Just stood there, frozen in the open doorway, staring down at the picture like it might change if I looked long enough. The neighborhood was quiet. The street lights flickered. Nothing moved. But I could feel it. That awful pressing sensation, the weight of being watched. I swallowed hard and forced myself to step back inside, locking the door behind me. The photo stayed on the porch. I didn't want it in my house. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my thoughts ran in circles. Why now? Why was this happening now, 5 years later? And the real question, what the hell happened to Ethan? By morning, I was done ignoring it. I needed answers. I needed to go back to the last place he was seen. His car had been found an hour outside of town, near an old hiking trail. I had been there before once when the search teams were looking for him. Back then, it had just been a location, a place he disappeared. Now, it felt like the only real clue I had left. The drive felt longer than I remembered. The roads were empty, stretching endlessly between rows of trees. The deeper I went, the more I felt that awful weight in my chest, like I was moving toward something I wasn't meant to find. By the time I reached the dirt lot, my hands were white-knuckled around the steering wheel. I turned off the car and sat there for a moment, staring out at the trailhead. Nothing had changed. Same wooden signpost, half-rotted with age. Same overgrown path leading into the trees. I stepped out of the car. The air was too still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I followed the trail. Ethan's car had been found about 100 yards in, just off the main path. I moved carefully, my pulse thrumming in my ears, scanning the trees for any sign of him, any sign of movement. Nothing. Just trees. Just silence. Then I saw the clearing. The same one from 5 years ago. And in the center, standing exactly where Ethan's car had once been, was a single black t-shirt, laid out perfectly, like someone had placed it there for me to find. I stopped cold. The t-shirt was his, the same faded band tee he had been wearing the day he disappeared. It was clean. Too clean, like it hadn't been sitting in the dirt for 5 years. Like it had been put there recently. Like someone had been waiting for me to come back. I took a step forward, then stopped. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier. And then I noticed it. The trees around me, they weren't right. I looked closer. The bark had scratches long, jagged marks, like claw marks. Number, not claws. Fingernails. I stepped closer to one of the trees. The scratches weren't random. They were letters, carved deep into the wood. Help me. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I turned and froze, because someone was standing at the edge of the clearing, not moving, not making a sound, just watching me. Ethan. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. He looked exactly the same. Same face, same build, same clothes. But his eyes, something was wrong with his eyes. They were too dark, too empty. Like a photograph that had been overexposed, the color washed away. He just stood there, not blinking, not moving, waiting. I forced myself to speak. Ethan? No reaction. I took a slow step forward. Where have you been? He tilted his head just slightly, like he was listening, like he was processing my words. Then finally moved. A slow, deliberate step toward me. Then another. And another. Something in my brain screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen in place, as he kept moving closer, until he was an arm's length away, and then, for the first time, he spoke. His voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in years. You found me. I was shaking. What happened to you? I whispered. Ethan didn't answer, didn't blink. His head tilted again. I waited. A sharp wind blew through the clearing. The trees groaned, whispering against each other. Ethan's shirt, the one on the ground, rippled slightly. And then, his mouth curved into a smile. A hollow, unnatural smile, like he was forcing his face to imitate an expression he no longer understood. I backed up. I couldn't help it. My body reacted before my mind could. And the second I moved, Ethan took a sharp step forward. Faster this time. Too fast. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a root. I hit the ground hard, breath knocking out of my lungs. By the time I looked up, he was gone. The clearing was empty, the air silent. The only sign he had ever been there was his shirt, still lying on the ground. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving. What the hell just happened? Was I imagining it? Had I really just seen him? Number. No, he was real. I had heard him. I had seen his face. And that smile. I will never forget that smile. I ran back to my car. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't breathe until I was locked inside with the engine running. I stared at the trees, waiting for something to move. But there was nothing. The woods were still, like he had never been there at all. When I got home, there was a message on my phone. No number, no name, just 3 words. Don't leave yet. I didn't move for a long time. The message was still glowing on my phone screen, those 3 words burning into my brain. Don't leave yet. No sender, no number, just a blank, empty notification. I sat there in my locked car, parked in my own driveway, staring out at the quiet street. Everything looked normal. But I knew it wasn't. I had just seen Ethan, and I knew deep in my bones I wasn't supposed to. I should have gone inside, locked my doors, burned my phone, done anything but what I actually did. I replied, "Who is this?" I didn't expect a response, but one came immediately. "Come back." I turned my phone off, took a long, shuddering breath, and tried to think. Ethan was missing for 5 years. Now he was back, but he wasn't the same. He hadn't aged, hadn't changed, like time had just paused for him. And the way he moved, the way he spoke, it wasn't right. I thought about his smile, that hollow, forced smile, and something cold settled in my chest. I don't think Ethan is alive. I didn't sleep. I sat in my dark apartment, watching the windows, listening to every sound outside. I kept telling myself I was safe, that I had locked the doors, that I was inside, that he couldn't get in. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A picture. It was my front door, taken from outside. I couldn't breathe. Slowly, without making a sound, I crept toward the peephole. My hand trembled as I pressed my eye to the door. At first I saw nothing, just the dark, empty hallway of my apartment complex. Then, a shadow moved. A shape, shifting in the dim glow of the exit sign. I stepped back, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Another buzz. Another picture. This time, it was taken from inside my apartment. I ran. Didn't think, didn't grab anything, just bolted. Out the front door, down the stairs, out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was in my car. Didn't stop driving until I was miles away. By the time I pulled into an empty gas station, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep them on the wheel. I forced myself to breathe. And then I made a decision. I was going to find out what happened to Ethan. By sunrise, I was back at the trailhead. It looked exactly the same as the day before. The same trees, the same empty dirt lot. But I knew better now. I wasn't alone. And whatever Ethan had become was waiting for me. I retraced my steps, back down the path, back to the clearing where I had seen him. But when I got there, my breath caught in my throat, because the t-shirt was gone, and in its place was a small handwritten note. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The paper was old, crumpled, dirty, but I could still make out the shaky, uneven handwriting. I waited, I waited, I waited. Why didn't you come? I swallowed hard. Ethan had written this. But when? The wind picked up around me, rustling the trees, and suddenly wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it. A presence, standing just behind me. I turned. Ethan was there, closer than before. His face paler, his eyes darker. Like the more I found, the more he faded. His lips moved, but no sound came out. And then, a whisper. so quiet I barely heard it over the wind. "Help me." I stepped forward before I could stop myself. "Ethan?" My voice shook. His body twitched, a small, unnatural movement, like a puppet on tangled strings. Then finally looked me in the eyes, and my stomach turned, because there was nothing there. No recognition, no emotion, just emptiness. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, he lunged. Everything happened too fast. 1 second, he was standing several feet away. The next, this face was inches from mine. I stumbled back, my vision blurring, my ears ringing with a high-pitched static. And then, I wasn't in the woods anymore. I was standing in a dark, windowless space. The air was heavy, wrong, and I wasn't alone. I turned. Figures lining the walls, standing completely still. Some of them I recognized. People from the news. People from old missing persons posters. And all of them were staring at me. My breath hitched. I turned back around. Ethan was still there, but his body was flickering, like an image on a dying screen. He reached for me, and for the first time since I found him, his face changed. Not blank, not hollow, but afraid, like he knew what was about to happen, like he was fighting it. "Go," he whispered, and then he screamed. I hit the ground, gasping for breath. The woods. I was back in the woods. The sky was dark, the clearing was empty. Ethan was gone. But in my hand, clenched so tight, my nails cut into my palm, was the note. The only proof I had left that any of it was real. I wasn't supposed to find him. And now, I think something knows I did. I staggered back to my car, my legs barely carrying me. I didn't stop driving until I was hours away. Didn't stop until I was in a new town, a new apartment, a new life. I deleted the photos, destroyed my phone, told myself I'd never look again. And for a while, I thought it was over. But then, last night, a new photo arrived. No sender, no location, just an image of a familiar wooded clearing. And in the center, Ethan, waiting. I didn't want to open the photo. I knew what it would be before I even looked. The woods. The same clearing where Ethan had disappeared. And there he was, standing in the middle of it, still waiting. Like he always had been. Like he always would be. I stared at the image, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. Fear, dread, guilt. Whatever had happened to Ethan, he wasn't supposed to come back. And I wasn't supposed to find him. But I had. And now something wanted me to finish what I started. I should have ignored it. Deleted the picture. Blocked whatever unknown force had sent it. But I didn't. Because I knew deep down I couldn't leave him like this. I had spent 5 years wondering where he went. Now I had my answer. And it wasn't fair. Ethan had been trapped in that place, wherever the hell it was, for half a decade. Stuck between here and nowhere. I couldn't just walk away. So I made my choice. I was going back. I drove through the night, headlights cutting through the endless stretch of empty road. The closer I got, the heavier the air became. Like something was pulling me in. Like it had been waiting for me, just like Ethan had. By the time I reached the dirt lot, my hands were shaking on the wheel. I turned off the car and stepped out. The wind was too still. The trees felt too tall, and in the distance, down the trailhead, I could see it, a dim light glowing in the clearing, waiting for me. I walked forward, every step feeling heavier than the last. The deeper I went, the more the world felt wrong, like I was stepping out of time, like I was moving towards something I wasn't supposed to see. Then, I entered the clearing, and he was there. Ethan, standing exactly where he had been in the photo, expressionless, motionless, watching me, waiting. I stopped a few feet away. My pulse was a roaring pulse of static in my ears. For a moment, we just stared at each other. And then, I took a slow step forward. Ethan, my voice barely came out. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his lips parted, and this time his voice wasn't hollow. It wasn't empty. It was pleading. Please, help me. A shiver crawled down my spine. I swallowed hard, don't know how. He took a step toward me, and I finally saw it. His eyes, up close, I could tell they weren't just dark. They were wrong, like a reflection in deep water, just barely out of focus. Like he was being held here by something else, something that wasn't letting him go. The wind shifted, the air thickened, and I felt it, the presence, the thing that had taken him, the thing that had been keeping him here. It was watching. It was waiting for me to take his place. I could feel it in my bones, in the marrow of my spine. If I stayed too long, if I looked too hard, I wouldn't be able to leave. I clenched my fists. I had come here for a reason. I wasn't leaving without him. I reached out, grabbing his wrist. His skin was cold. Too cold. Like touching something that had been left out in the winter for too long. I pulled. He didn't move. His body jerked slightly, like something was holding him in place. Like he was tied to the air itself. I gritted my teeth. Come on, man. My voice shook. You have to move. He shuddered. His hands twitched. And then, finally took a staggered step forward. The wind screamed through the clearing, and I felt it break. Whatever was holding him, whatever had kept him here. I yanked him forward, and then we ran. Branches whipped past us. The world blurred at the edges. I didn't know if we were moving through the woods or if the woods were moving around us. Everything felt stretched, twisted, like reality was snapping back into place. Ethan's grip was tight on my wrist. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just kept running, until suddenly, we burst into the parking lot. The cold night air slammed into me, sharp and real and solid. We were back, and when I turned, Ethan was still there, breathing, shaking, alive. Neither of us spoke. I was too afraid to ask if this was real. Too afraid that if I did, he would disappear again. But he didn't. He just stood there, his chest rising and falling with ragged, uneven breaths. And then, after a long, terrible pause, he looked at me. His eyes were clear now, human again, and his lips parted. Thank you. I don't know what happened to him. I don't think I ever will. Ethan doesn't talk about it. He doesn't remember much, just a feeling of waiting, a sense of time stretching endlessly, like he was in a place where time didn't move, a place that wasn't meant for him. He told me one thing, though. One thing that still makes my skin crawl. It wasn't just me. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I want to. We left town after that. Ethan moved in with his sister. I packed up and got as far away from those woods as I could. And for the most part, it's been quiet. Nothing strange. No more photos. No more messages. But sometimes, I think about that clearing. That impossible place. And I wonder how many more are still waiting. How many more were taken? And worst of all, who will go looking for them next?